welcome back to Unlock Her Tech, a safe space podcast for women in the tech industry. I am one of your hosts, Jen Carswell, journalist, broadcaster, specializing in business and technology. And I'm here with Ellie. Ellie, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Jen. We have been having sunshine here in London for the past few months. I'm enjoying it at the moment because it's not going to last long.
Yes, definitely make the most of it while you can and try not to melt in the process. And I'm very excited to say that later on we'll be joined by Carly Richmond, a developer advocate lead at Elastic based in London, and Katarina Hansen, who's director of engineering at Kojo in California. And they will help us dive into this episode's topic, which is job searching in the tech industry. And this can be a difficult process in any industry, but for women in tech, it can be especially fraught. So, Ellie, what's been your experience? Have you found it easy, difficult, somewhere in between?
Yeah, I would say applying for jobs is always challenging in any industry, but the shift in the tech industry over the past few years has been very huge. I also had my own struggles when I was applying for jobs. I sometimes found it very unfair process because the levels and expectations for junior or mid-level developers were very different depending on the company. And things like hiring fees has made it even more difficult when I was applying for jobs.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, it has been quite a tough time for the tech industry with around 97% of tech companies laying off at least some of their staff. So, I mean, obviously that does mean that there are a lot of people. So that does mean that there are a lot of people out there looking for jobs right now.
Yeah, it's a worrying time for sure. I think we are all feeling all of the effects of the layoffs and changing job market. Personally, I have had moments of self-doubt and frustration too, but I've learned to focus on what I can control instead of what I cannot control. I also believe it's the time for everyone to evaluate of a skill and connect with others because we are not alone in this.
Is that something that you learned from our previous podcast on imposter syndrome?
Yes, definitely.
Good. And in that episode, we talked quite a lot about internal and external factors and how they can be influential. And I mean, the same is seems to be true here as well. And also, I mean, something that you alluded to, which is the confidence gap. So a Hewlett Packard study found women applied for jobs when they met 100% of the criteria, so all of the criteria, while for men it was just 60%. Is that something that resonates with you, Ellie? Is that something that you've either seen or experienced?
Yes, absolutely. I think I also shared in the previous episode, I fall under the expert category of like, imposter syndrome, which means for people who didn't listen to that episode is I often feel like I need to know everything before I can believe I'm good at a particular skills. That has definitely held me back in the past from applying for jobs. But also, I think I have learned the best practice is just to go for it. The worst thing is gonna happen is just not getting the job and getting rejection, and that's I think completely fine.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get into that a little bit more with our guest in just a minute. But first, I just want to touch on some of the external factors as well. So we briefly mentioned internal. So the external has to do with, bias, unconscious or otherwise, about women working in the tech industry. A group of, or sorry, a study by a group called Women in Tech found that 65% of recruiters felt bias is a problem in the recruitment industry, which is, quite significant. And this has to do with family, child responsibilities, as well as flexible working.
Yes, definitely. I think I've experienced a lot unconscious bias, and I've seen that unconscious bias is still ongoing and happening in the tech industry. Some people still believe that men are better at tech jobs than women, which is unfortunate. And there is also a flexibility bias when someone thinks that people who ask for flexibility working hours, they are not serious about their careers compared to others. And this also affects women more than men, I think, especially mothers who may need more flexibility when they are also having a full-time job. There is also something called maternal bias, where people assume mothers can focus on their jobs. It's really frustrating when your skills and experience don't get the attention they deserve because of these old-fashioned ideas. I think one other clear bias I've seen is some companies are not also hiring people from certain countries, which is really upsetting and unfair.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the research also shows that once women enter into the tech industry, they're twice as likely to leave than men are 10 to 20 years into their career, often because of a lack of career progression and slower salary growth. So harder to get in and then, harder to stay in.
Yes, unfortunately, that's very true. Many women leave the tech industry because they don't see clear opportunities to grow, or maybe they feel they are stuck with a slower salary progress. It's also disheartening to work hard and still feel like you are not moving forward. I think companies need to be more intentional about creating fair career paths or making sure women are supported or recognized, especially when they are moving into the more senior roles.
Okay, great. Well, now that we've laid the foundations, let's jump right in with our guests. So, to understand more about the current situation and how women can better compete in the initial recruitment phase, we're joined by Carly Richmond from Elastic and Katarina Hansen from Kojo. Welcome both. We're really, really excited to have you on the show, our first guest. So that's great. So, firstly, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and background? Carly, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in tech for just under 14 years. I have a background, my degree background is in computer science. I joined on a graduate program, used to work in an investment bank, and then spent 10 years working there as a software engineer, progressing up kind of through the traditional roles that you have as a software engineer, as a manager, things like that. In my time there, I also had responsibilities for interviewing, and I was heavily involved in graduate recruitment. So I know a little bit about those kind of pipelines too. And then just over 3 years ago, moved into developer relations at Elastic, which is a massive pivot from being an engineer, and have experience as a hiring manager there as well. So nice to meet you all, and yeah, happy to share.
Great. And Katarina?
Yeah, my path hasn't been quite as traditional. I started as a chemical engineer for about a decade working in manufacturing plants. And then I taught myself how to code, got myself a job as a junior engineer, and worked my way up from there. I found that a lot of the skills that I had used as a chemical engineer were really applicable to leading in software. And so I moved into management pretty quickly. And I've been managing now at my last three companies. I'm currently director of engineering at Kojo, and I'm managing about 50 people. So this has been a really interesting journey.
So my question is, what's your overall view of recruitment for women intake? What's the split? Carly, do you think that, what do you think that is?
So obviously in preparation, I did do a bit of digging. I think part of the view for recruitment and the gender split is firstly, there's not a great pipeline coming in. I mean, the general stat I found from 2023 is that women in tech is basically 23% of roles. And then when you start to look at kind of more senior levels as well, which would obviously be a pipeline to more senior roles, that drops off as well. So I think there is partially a pipeline problem of people coming in. The second thing I'd say is if the pool's not there, then obviously it makes it really difficult for people to be hired in the first place. So I think that is part of it. And then I think the other thing is just quite frankly other factors, which I'm sure we'll get into, with subsequent questions around why women might not go for particular roles. And I've got my own experiences about why I've maybe needed a nudge or encouragement to go for particular roles, or why they might stay in a role for longer you expect. And I've had experiences like that as well. So I think it is a mixed picture. I think some aspects are better than when I started 13 years ago. But obviously there's still a bit to go, I would say.
Now, we mentioned earlier in the podcast, and I think maybe Carly, you're alluding to that there, that women maybe aren't very likely to go for a job unless they meet all of the criteria that they see sort of posted. Katerina, is that something that you see?
Actually, I've been seeing a lot of women taking the advice of go ahead and apply to the roles if you don't have all of the experience. Um, I have found that this can make them actually appear a little more junior than the other men in the hiring pool, and that's not necessarily bad, but I do think that there's an additional layer on top of whether or not you are going to apply where you're picking the things that are must haves versus the things that are nice to haves. So if the role says, we need somebody to do work in this language, they're probably going to be expecting you to be able to use that language fluently on day one, potentially even in the interviews at this point. But if they say, oh, we prefer if you have experience in financial tech, that might not be quite as necessary because a lot of times you can learn the business and they'll teach you the business part of it. So, check off the main boxes. And if there's a way that you can say, hey, this is applicable, I would say do the mapping explicitly for the hiring manager. Tell them why this other experience that you have applies to that particular skill request. And that would really help out.
And when you say it makes people appear more junior, what do you mean by that?
I've had a number of people apply where they didn't even have the minimum number of years of experience. And so I'm looking for somebody with 3 years of experience, maybe, because I'm looking for somebody who has already gotten over that hump of being able to work in a team of software engineers, use Git. They've, you know, used the entire, they've probably built the entire web services platform at that point. And then I might get somebody who's maybe a year in, and they just appear more junior at that point because they haven't had as much experience. So don't necessarily filter yourself out, but also think of it more as getting yourself on the radar with a company in particular, so that if you don't necessarily pass this time, try again in 6 months. They love it when you keep coming back and build skills in the interim.
Carly, you've been nodding your head quite a lot at what Katerina's been saying.
Yes, I think that's fair. I mean, I don't know if I've necessarily seen that I've seen that in my specs that maybe sometimes people with maybe less years experience have been applying for some roles. If I compare that to my own experience, I've been the person that has had to feel like they've ticked the box of all the must haves. And actually, that's where allyship and mentor support can really come in to help encourage people to apply. So, one of the reasons I'm sitting, at Elastic and I've originally joined as an advocate and then progressed into a manager is the fact that I had an amazing mentor and support in my friend Helen, who, when I looked at that spec and went, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this, and started focusing on what I didn't have. And she's like, but you have these things, you should apply for this, even though there's aspects are not quite there. So I don't know if it's generational or not. That might be an interesting thing to discuss. But certainly for me, looking at my millennial situation and as in my level of confidence that where I was at the time, I was the person that was saying, oh, I can't apply for that. And I needed the encouragement and support of a friend to actually apply. And sometimes that does work out, which it did in this case, which was cool.
Right, so a LinkedIn survey suggested that women were less likely to apply for jobs based on certain language. So the example that it gives is the word aggressive. So 44% of women said that they wouldn't go for a job if the advert had that word. So is language important? Can it be an issue? Katerina?
I do think that language can be a turnoff in job descriptions. I know that since I am working at mostly smaller Silicon Valley tech startups, I have a lot of influence over what the job description actually looks like. So I really do go through and try to make sure that we're not using harsh language or particularly aggressive language. I've definitely stripped out a number of we're looking for a rock star and we're all a family, as I realized that those types of phrases are big turnoffs for people. Um,
Are they turn-offs for people, or are they turn-offs for women? For everybody?
for they're turned off for everybody, honestly. Um, and I think that it's not just because, they're buzzwords that people have noticed, but I think that they don't actually tell you anything about the job or what it's going to be like to actually work at the company. So I view my role as providing a clear job description with the skills that I need and a glimpse into what it feels like to work on the team. I really do want people to be able to picture what it is going to be like on a daily basis. So if the language isn't doing that job, and I think a lot of times more aggressive language doesn't, then we've already lost good candidates before we start.
And what was it that made you realize that language had that there is this sort of correlation between language and potential candidates? Was that something that you saw through like just your own recruitment process or your own sort of personal experience, or like how did that sort of come about?
I think I first heard about it maybe 5 years ago, and it was just kind of part of the zeitgeist that they were saying, hey, take a look at the language. It's ruining your upper pipeline. And there's a lot of tools that became available where you could take your job description and run them through these tools, and they would highlight sentiment or something that is particularly masculine, particularly feminine. And you do get a sense after a little while of using those tools of the types of phrases that you should avoid or maybe use. But I think that, yeah, really when it comes down to it, just making sure that your job description is clear uh, definitely helps match you with the people that are going to be able to do the job.
Carly, has that been similar to your experience?
Yeah, so when I worked before in banking, I didn't have a lot of control really over a job spec that did tend to be standardized. And that also kind of predates. I think there was definitely an appreciation to look out for language, but I didn't necessarily get exposed to tools that could help with that. What I've seen in more recent years is like there's tools like Textio and things that will actually flag particular elements of sentiment, and say this is, as exactly as Katerina said, this is more male or female aligned, or based on data, this tends to be a bit of a turn off for these types of roles. And certainly those tools have definitely helped, along with once you've got an established baseline for a particular rec, knowing what had worked and not based on prior data, you can kind of that then to start build on top of those and have like common sections that make sense based on like the team, and then you might have to only change the aspects that are relating to a particular role if that changes. So I've definitely seen similar things.
And I mean, all of this sort of suggests or kind of hints at like unconscious bias, doesn't it, around qualities that we might think are either sort of like male or female or attract men or women. Um, so is that something that you were thinking about and that you notice? And how is that kind of like positive or negative sort of within this discussion?
I do think that there's both conscious and unconscious bias around the types of skills that women are assumed to bring to any role. That's always been true. That's probably going to continue to be true for the rest of our lifetimes. But as leaders, I think that our job is to be aware of our own biases and not just point to a like a systemic set of biases. I do think that women are often seen as being stronger in soft skills like communication and organization. And that's not necessarily a disadvantage if the company that you're applying to values those skills. And I do because I feel that software is a team sport and those skills really do matter. But the problem becomes if people fail to recognize also women's technical depth. So um, we can set up any kind of automated process, and that automated process is going to have some kind of systemic bias one way or the other. I think my best recommendation for a woman who is trying to deal with that bias is actually to go around it and network. A lot of times that will get you right around a lot of the automation and the bias and to the front of the line. And I would say, that's pretty key, especially in a tough job market.
I mean, you, Carly, worked in a different sector before, so maybe you are sort of better poised to answer this. But do you think that unconscious or conscious bias is more of an issue in the tech sector, in tech recruitment, or is it just kind of everywhere? It's sort of ubiquitous.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the recs and stuff, it was like software engineering within banking, so it was like a subset. But I think unconscious bias, there's a reason why we're getting unconscious bias training every year. There's a reason why over my career they've looked at things such as anonymization of job specs, because the fact of the matter is it's still there, and it's something that we need to be aware of. And that's why we look at aspects of recruitment, we should be tying it back to facts and quantifiable feedback and data as much as we can. So I think those things are still certainly there. I, I don't know if financial services necessarily added anything specific to that. I think it was more because it was a larger institution with a larger HR function. We could get better guidance. They were certainly tracking data, and they also had, particularly looking at graduate and other levels, they had quantifiable goals and targets that they wanted to hit with regards to increasing not just women coming into roles within the organization in tech specifically, but also how they were progressing through, and also if they were leaving or not. Because it's not just about getting people in the door when we think about recruitment, it's also, are they actually progressing? Are they staying with that organization? Or are they ending up kind of coming out and you end up with basically a leaky pipe at the other side? So those things were still very much present in there. I guess, Katerina, have you seen anything similar?
I would say my current job being in construction technology, a lot of times we tend to have uh, women are maybe less likely or even less interested in construction than average. But I would say that the technology part of it is actually very separate in a lot of ways. And so just because the technology is focused on an industry that is traditionally male dominated doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply to those types of roles. Yeah.
Do you think those companies are, I mean, do you think that those sorts of companies, like your company, will attract as many women, be like as comfortable a place for a woman to work as somewhere that is more of a gender split, or maybe like a startup that is, that is for women, or that, do you know what I mean, that is sort of like maybe typically more gender split or even sort of skewed towards women?
I think that a lot of the inbound pipeline tends to be smaller in that sense for women like coming to us. But we definitely go out and try to find and bring in women who have experience as well as part of our recruiting process. I think it also helps that my CEO is a woman, and we have a number of women in leadership, including myself. So we've been trying to make sure that when they get the job, they have a really good place to work and a really good culture to work within. And, I think a lot of the things that we put in place for everybody around predictable promotions and coaching and mentoring is good for women as well. So
So it's just good for everybody.
it's good for everybody.
Carly, is there an issue with girls going into a STEM subject? 78% of students can't name a famous female working in technology.
So I would say yes. I mean, I come from a background, a computer science degree, and I did have fab role models like my sister, etc., that kind of encouraged me to take that kind of path. And I always loved kind of STEM science subjects at school. I did have a look at some stats because I knew I was coming on, and they were saying women make up 29% of jobs in STEM and management levels 13. So I think there is an issue with pipeline coming in. So I think that's partially down to maybe women not necessarily going into like those kind of subjects, studying or apprenticeships or university. And that was my experience. Like I think we were been chatting with people before, and I think there was like 8 in a class of 40 for my graduating bachelor's year. 8 women in a class of 40 is not that great. And obviously, I think other disciplines are probably in a similar situation. Now, I remember speaking to someone a while ago, and they'd said they were actually dissuaded at school from taking subjects like physics and those kind of ones on that kind of basis of gender. And I think that is definitely changing. But if you still have those kind of traditional attitudes, then you've kind of failed at the first hurdle, because people are going to just kind of get dissuaded and go off and do something else, take the kind of easier route. Not always, but it's certainly making it harder is not going to help. So I think there's an issue with pathway coming in, but there's also, we talked about earlier, that kind of, the leaky pipe later on. There's an issue with that as well. So one of the things I've seen a lot popping up more recently is actually people leaving once they've gotten in the door. They'll maybe leave within 10 to 20 years. And I got a number that was 56% of women pursuing STEM careers end up leaving, with the top reason being unsupportive and hostile workspaces. So obviously there's not just an issue with people coming in, there's issue with progression, and there's issue with actually retaining. And that all kind of fits together into one kind of big horrible mess, which is why we end up with actually the lack of balance that we have. So I guess the answer is yes, but it's certainly more complicated than that in my view.
And I mean, do you think that that also has to do with this, this sort of like leaky pipe that you're talking about? Does that also have to do with sort of the fact that women have to take on more non-work responsibilities, sort of within the home, caring, things like that? There's another interesting statistic that 72% of women in the tech industry think their careers are suffering due to childcare and family responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess there's two aspects there. I guess there's the assumption of, if you've got that particular situation with work or caring responsibilities, you might also end up being given certain types of glue work, kind of, not always intentionally. Some is maybe unintentionally due to unconscious bias, but you end up with the time that you've got in your organization working, you end up doing the glue kind of work, like, getting so and so's leaving card, or arranging the team social or the team lunch, all those kinds of things. But then also, when it comes to your evenings, you might not necessarily have the same access to going to those socials and things, because you have responsibilities at home. And I've certainly, before I had my son, that was something I raised as a concern and did discuss with other women. And that was one of the things they mentioned was, well, I have to get home, so I'm going to, get up at 5 o'clock, and I'm not going to go for those after work beers. And that can disadvantage you in terms of progression. I'm quite, I don't know if I want to say fortunate, but as part of my job, I have a travel requirement. And I've had to be honest about what I can do and set a reasonable limit there. But I can still do my job, and I still do it well. But that therefore means that my husband has to take the brunt when I'm away. He's the one that has to do both drop off and pick up. And then it's the same situation if he does travel for work or another aspect as well. So I think sometimes women end up being challenged because what they're seeing in their home life and situation means that makes it more challenging for them to be present and be there, and they're having to deal with all the other stuff in the background, and they get this additional thing of the glue tasks and the other things alongside, expected to do a full load of work. So it does feel sometimes like the cards are stacked against you. But that does also mean that everyone needs to be honest and say, look, no, sorry, this is both to men and women as well. I can't do this for this particular reason, or I'll have to move this around, and just be honest and frank about it. So that's been my experience. And it's not, if anything, actually, as strange as it is, moving from advocacy away from some of the roles I've done in the past, it actually was easier to have that balance and set that limit, because I had to be just honest from the start. And also, I came into it after I had my son. So I wasn't trying to play catch up with the expectations of hours that I'd set when I didn't have those responsibilities. So sometimes people can assume that you'll be able to do exactly the same stuff and you can't. And sometimes there's not enough support to help people with managing that conversation and that relationship. That's where things such as mentoring and coaching, when people have these particular caring situations and responsibilities or a change in life circumstance, can come in, because then it helps people like navigate the deliverable situation and have honest, candid conversations about what's achievable and what's not.
Katerina, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I agree with a lot of what Carly said. Definitely, early on in my attempt to move into management, I decided that I just wasn't going to bring cookies into the office anymore, which was really unfortunate for everybody because I love to bake. But I did not want to be filling that role and that expectation as I was attempting to move into more of a leadership position and gain more responsibility. Um, I do think that I have found that technology compared to my previous career is actually very friendly towards work life balance in a lot of ways. It's kind of like you can work any 60 hours a week you want. So I have had the ability when things in life do come up to take time off and uh, go take care of my aging parents and uh, travel and spend a month working out of a completely different time zone because I had to. Um, so, uh, if you find a good match, if you find a company that is supportive, I think that they will work with your boundaries. And if you don't have that, then it's a good reason to question why you're devoting your time to helping them with their products at that point. So, I think it's important to have a really good fit and make sure that your values really match the values of the company and that you can trust the leadership to be empathetic and to have some sense for, you know, working with you and your life as a person, as a whole person.
So, Chang Meng, director of BuzzFeed's Career Science Lab, said there is not only a glass ceiling but also a sticky floor, where women tend to stay in a position for which they are overqualified. Katrina, what do you make of it?
I think the sticky floor analogy resonates, especially in how we, as a industry, continue to ask women to prove and reprove their technical credibility. A lot of times, women will go very heavily into the capability and the competency in various technology and then wonder why they're not being pegged for leadership. But leadership isn't just a more senior IC role, it requires a different skill set entirely. And I've actually heard things like, can we afford to promote her? She's been holding down the fort on that team. And I think that that logic really traps people in place. To start to move into leadership, you have to shift your focus. You might have to ease up on your technical output and start building influence and strategy. And you might get things wrong and you might fail. And that's really scary. And you're taking a risk. And if your leadership isn't willing to take that risk with you and mentor you through those early stages, then uh, the transition can be very difficult and something that a lot of people aren't, willing or able to take at that point. Um, that kind of growth really takes support and trust, and a lot of times women aren't getting either.
Do you think leadership looks different for women than it does for men? That what we expect of female leaders are are women sort of being put into like male leadership boxes sometimes? Is there like any kind of like disconnect there, or um, like are there sort of headwinds in the kind of like what does leadership look like?
I do think that there's a narrower path to walk for women. I think women in leadership um, are expected to, I don't know that I can even really articulate it. you're expected to be likable. Likability is a really big thing. Warm and optimism helps. I would say still competent, still get stuff done. You're probably taking on, more tasks and more responsibility than your average male leader, and you're expected to deliver. There's a lot of pressure, and it's you know, not necessarily. It's not fair. It's not fair that the expectations are higher, but we also can kind of play the game. And as a leader, I work to do my best every day, and um, definitely keep learning. And that's you know that's part of it's kind of part of being a woman in leadership, is you keep driving towards your destination.
Yeah. Actually, I have an interesting story on this because I think sometimes off the back of that kind of expectation of, the kind of warmth and aspects, sometimes there's still assumptions of aspects of male characteristics that we're still expected to do, even though it contradicts completely that notion that people expect. So one of the things I found in the first few months when I got promoted to vice president when I worked in banking was I would turn up to these like officer meetings and I would get really annoyed and frustrated because everyone kept talking over me and it was really, really annoying. And I asked a former boss at the time for some feedback, and his attitude was, "You just keep talking and you shout louder." And believe it or not, that doesn't work if you are a woman who's soft spoken like myself. Because you end up in a situation where people just continue to talk over you anyway. And then when I'd speak to other women, they're like, "Yeah, that feedback is rubbish. Like that doesn't work." But also, I was then surprised at the number of women who were getting feedback of the same thing, that they were having to employ these male characteristics in order to be heard in those particular scenarios. So it's more, I think, about finding an authentic mechanism that works, similar to what Katerina talked about, like trying your best and finding the authentic way to come across, and also playing down and saying, actually, I'm not taking that feedback that I'm going to shout over the top of everybody, because that doesn't fit either. So that's another thing for people that are supporting and encouraging women to progress through leadership, and also kind of progress into lead IC contributor roles through senior and principal. In all those situations, don't tell them to emulate male characteristics. Help them to find an authentic way up.
And what did you do in meetings so that you didn't have to be so shouty? What was your solution?
Um, Sometimes if I felt like sometimes actually saying I agree or I agree but to build on what someone else has said to get your point in was a good strategy, because then it looked like we're contributing to the bigger conversation. Also calling out if someone had said something that mirrored what someone else did was another useful thing as well, because then people were more aware about the fact that, oh, so and so had said that, I should probably pay more attention and not kind of dismiss on that. Um, COVID kind of partially helped as well, because then everything was a rabble and everyone had to end up talking over each other anyway, just because of how the delays with Zoom calls and things worked. But also sometimes just either letting it go or following up afterwards and saying, "Oh, I just thought of this," was another mechanism as well. So there's a few strategies around it that help.
So you sort of touched on it a little bit, both of you have in sort of different answers, but I mean, AI obviously is this massive sort of evolution within recruitment. How is it, reshaping the way that recruitment is being done? What is the kind of knock on to career paths, and sort of how do you see that evolving? Carly, if I can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a few things where it's playing. Firstly, obviously things like some companies making use of AI tooling to scan and filter out CVs is an aspect that's probably coming through. That's something that probably needs to still have an element of human in the loop to make sure that things are, people are not being filtered out based on biases within the algorithm. So you could possibly, particularly if they're not anonymized, or it's picking up on particular, some of the kind of more female focused characteristics we talked about. If it's dismissing those due to a bias in the data set, you wouldn't want that situation. So I think these things are still being used, but we should still be using kind of a human in the loop to validate that stuff and make sure it's there. I think also people looking to showcase like what they can do with AI tooling as well might be something that ends up factoring on CVs, showing that you have that potential and that you're keeping yourself up to date. That's obviously a quite important thing in tech. So showcasing personal projects and stuff, I think, is something that people will end up having to add to their CV to prove that out. But I think on the other side as well, I think we're going to see a lot more AI generated CVs, which might actually be problematic, particularly if people are not sanity checking it for accuracy and correctness. Or if people are, training things on like their public data, like if you throw your CV into a chatbot and tell it to optimize it, including things like your contact information, then obviously that means that you're leaking out your personal information, which is probably not a good idea. So I think also being cautious about using it the right way to generate a CV or improve the wording of things can be advantageous. But you need to make sure that your CV is still accurate and that it still, showcases your skills in the right way. So I think that's probably something that recruiters might be on the lookout for as well. I guess, Catherine, have you got anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I would only add, make sure that you can talk about anything that is on your CV in an interview and talk about it in depth. So don't put things on your CV if it isn't something that you're going to have a story for, because the hiring manager is probably going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I often think that a CV is basically like the point of a CV is just to get you the interview. Like that's the whole kind of point of it, and then that's it. That's sort of like the entirety of its purpose is finished, and then the rest is down to the individual.
I would I look at all of the CVs before I interview anybody, and I will pick out things that I have questions on, or even something that I think is particularly intriguing and I want to know more about. I definitely take the attitude of, if you've done it before, you're probably going to do it the same way again. So a lot of times, digging in and asking about details on, this was a particularly impressive project, tell me how you did it, tell me what trouble you ran into, tell me what you learned from it, and making sure that something that they are saying that they can do is something that they can do, and do that well, because I'm probably going to want them to do that at the current role. So, um,
Yes, I also will search for things. This is probably a bit more specific to advocacy rather than what I did before in other types of tech recruitment and interviewing. But if you've put down on your CV on that you've spoken at particular conferences, I'm going to see if I can try and find the video to see what your speaking style is like. If you say that you've written articles, I'm going to go and try and find those articles. If I can't find them, I'm probably going to ask you about it as well, because there are certain tech roles that maybe are that have aspects of, you might put down personal projects, GitHub repos, these things. If you put it down and the link's broken or I can't find it, I'm probably going to ask you questions. So that's another thing that might feed into the notion of AI. If you ask it to generate stuff and it generates like incorrect links or fake projects and stuff as well, and I can't find it, and then I ask you about it and you say, oh, sorry, that was a mistake, that's not leaving you in a good light personally, to be perfectly honest. So um, the CV is definitely one aspect, but for certain types of roles, it is possible that an interviewer ahead of an interview might actually look for other things too. So just be on the warning for that.
I think it definitely depends on the level of the job as well. Definitely going to be doing more upfront research for higher level roles.
Definitely agreed.
Do you think job descriptions and required skills will change as AI becomes more integrated into our daily tools? Katrina, what does this mean for women upskilling or re-entering tech?
I am worried that we're going to see fewer junior engineering job opportunities, and um, as AI kind of takes over the more repetitive tasks, the easier tasks, the more well defined tasks, companies are going to start asking for people to start at higher and higher levels. Um, this is actually, in my opinion, a big danger for the industry as a whole and a risk for us that we're not going to have a pipeline of engineers coming through at all in a couple of years. I think, in the most optimistic sense, it is companies shifting the burden of skilling up onto the employee. So the employee is going to have to find ways to get themselves to a mid senior engineer position on their own without the apprenticeship levels that they would normally get at companies. I've seen this happening at smaller companies already where traditionally there's often been a attitude of we can't hire anybody but senior engineers because our code base is so tough. And that to me is really silly. Your code base should not be that complicated.
That's
um,
a bigger alarm bell.
yeah, yeah. But more recently, I'm hearing it because we don't need them because we can do that. We can put the AI agent on all of those problems, and it's just going to solve it. I don't know whether or not that's real, but I can definitely see that the job market is shrinking for those junior engineering roles. And yeah, I think in terms of the work that everybody is doing, it's going to be more architectural. It's going to be more systems design, organizational, potentially product requirements focused, developing product requirements, translating them into technical requirements, but not actually getting to the code. There's probably going to be a lot of testing jobs because if people aren't effectively reviewing AI, then you have to test to make sure that your products are actually doing what you need them to do. Um, yeah, we'll still need engineers. I don't think engineering is going away in general, but they're probably going to be more like gatekeepers than writing the individual lines of code in the
Carly?
No, I think basically the testing and validation element is going to be the big key, along with, I mean, it might be, depending on how they evolve, that some of the more nitty-gritty complex tasks, things around orchestration, is going to possibly kind of come more to the fore of people. And I do agree. I mean, Charity Majors pointed this out last year about the potential elimination of junior roles, and it does seem to be coming through with that. One other aspect I think that it might be is a pivot towards more of gathering the information and the context that the agents and the particular models are going to need. So maybe the kind of evolving field of context engineering might become a bigger thing. So you as an engineer looking and examining not just prompts, but things like what kind of data am I passing into ground and restrict it to the problem? What tools are going to access particular sources of information to allow that agent to achieve that task? And then letting automated code tools do things like code the agent and stuff with the appropriate prompts of, well, you need to pull data from these sources and give the appropriate configuration. So that might be something that maybe evolves in time to come as well.
And you've both sort of hinted already at the role of AI in screening and bias and unconscious bias, and whether that's, I'm just wondering, do you think overall that's sort of helping or hurting kind of equity, equality, um, within gender and other sort of metrics? Katerina?
I don't have any hard data on that. Um, I do know that AI can only do what it could only really work with the data that it's been trained on, and we know from decades of experience that there is bias baked into the data that I'm sure it was trained on. Um, I've heard of techniques where you can pair an AI up with another AI that kind of challenges that AI, and it's entirely possible that you could set up a system where maybe it is in fact more equitable than a human who is a lot less predictable and a lot more individual. But I don't think that automation is necessarily going to save the industry as a whole in that sense. Um,
Carly, some nodding on your side.
Yeah, it's more. I guess we talk about AI as a judge with some aspects of like data retrieval tasks where it will look at what the AI has done and say, it'll basically give it a validation and say, no, what you did was right, or no, what you did was wrong. And I think that's probably a fair point from Katerina. That might be a particular thing that comes in where you have an LLM basically judging what another LLM is doing. But then also there's other aspects of traditional machine learning sitting on top of maybe the hiring data that might also be a validation mechanism as well. So anomaly detection would be a fantastic example of a long-standing type of machine learning model that is used to find those blips. So that could be something that's potentially looked at as well, alongside using a human judge to maybe dig into those particular anomalies, or even lack of anomalies, as the case may be, depending on the characteristics you're looking at, to try and validate and see. So I think there's going to be a lot more. There already is a maybe there's not as much fact checking and validation and looking at bias as there should be, but I know that's something that many people are trying to change.
Oh, well, let's hope that it works. Um, so those are the sort of main questions in the sort of first section that we were going to look at. So that's all kind of, we've gone through all of that. Is there anything that either of you want to add that you think that we didn't really sort of touch on or cover? I mean, I feel like we really got through a lot, but is there anything that you feel that you want to add? You can say no. No? Okay, great. Okay, so now we're gonna go into the sort of advice section, which is part of all of the format of the podcast where we try to give, practical information for people who are listening and, things that they can take away and use, in their own lives, in their own recruitment journeys. So we will get into that bit now. So let's talk more about the practical things that can be done to overcome some of the obstacles that we've mentioned and try and level the playing field a little bit. So how do you know if a job is worth applying to, even if you, sorry, how do you know if a job is worth applying to, even if you don't meet every bullet point? Carly, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. So there's a few things I can think of based on my own experience of whether I've applied or not applied for things. So for me, when it's a two-way street. It's always going to be a two-way street, recruitment. You cannot apply for something if there's something that twigs on your radar that's not right. So I'd say, I mean, it depends. If you're wanting to kind of try and get interview experience and practice, particularly for technical exercises, then you might apply for particular companies you're not 100% sure of. But be mindful of the ones that you really want versus the ones that maybe are within that category. I'd also suggest things such as think about the things that are important to you as a company and look at things like their presence in the news and media. Are there any scandals that put you off it that don't align with your ethics? Because otherwise, of course, you're probably wasting your energy on that one, and you won't be as invested in the recruitment process, or you probably won't want the job. Think about other aspects like, does the industry matter? So for me, after I came out of financial services for 10 years, I didn't want to do anything financial services anymore. So whenever a recruiter would say to me, or I'd see on a site when I was applying financial services, those ones I would immediately discount because I didn't want to go into that particular industry because I felt like I'd been there, done that, and learned everything I could. So think about those aspects along with things like the company size. Is it going to be able to adhere to your balance and flexibility? So for example, is the office easy to get to? All these things that actually you probably didn't think about before you just threw the application in. It might be worth checking that a bit earlier. Also look, does it align? Do the technologies that they're using interest you? Is there things that you want to learn? Is there also growing room? So are you seeing like potentially options for progression? Is that listed? So some job portals might have that. They might have other aspects such as like founders, state of funding, all those kinds of things can help you make a decision alongside the role. Then look at the benefits. Do they have any values like a source code like Elastic does or something else? Look at all those things and use that as a sanity check of whether you want to apply or not. And then also make sure you tailor your CV and potentially include a cover letter to call out and refer to those things. Because that's not useless information. It helps you understand if you want to apply, but also because you're researching the company, which is useful for latter interview stages if and when you get there. You've already done some of that prep work ahead of time too. So those are the kind of things I end up looking at.
Katerina, is there anything that you would add? That was a very comprehensive answer.
I would say if you're interested in a job, don't filter yourself out. You never really know what is going on in the company or how they approach posting positions. I worked at a number of companies where they have a lot of leeway around the the job title, the job level. So they may be posting for a senior engineer, but if they find a talented junior engineer that they think might have some kind of, they might have potential, uh, and they are showing a good amount of interest and passion about the company and the product that they're building, they may open up a junior role for them. They may be able to find that role in the budget. So uh, that would be something that, don't filter yourself out. You never get anything unless you ask. So it's easy enough to submit a resume, especially if it's something that you are actually very passionate about.
Yeah, that's really true. I just want to pick up, Carly, on something that you said about it being a two-way street. And I mean, I work in media, which is like very oversubscribed. So very often it's that my attitude, despite myself, tends to be, oh, I really hope they want me. I really hope they want me. And I don't actually think about the sort of like, the reverse, the two-way side. And I'm just wondering you if that's sort of something that maybe also resonates in tech, or is that maybe not so much an issue in the industry?
It's something that's popped up in any training that I've done, both when I was doing kind of interviewing as a graduate, kind of interviewing for graduate positions in the past, and also for now. Sometimes when you go through that type of training, I remember the first time I went through, and one of the recruiters said things that I thought were really obvious, like don't be looking at your phone when you're interviewing a candidate, look interested in their answers, be friendly, be polite, these kind of things that are obvious. And the reason that that was called out is because interviewing is a two-way street, because that interviewer that sat in front of you, in front of that candidate, is a representative of the company. If they're going to be a jerk, or there's something that they're going to say or do that makes a particular interviewee feel uncomfortable, then the way that they're going to end up reacting to that is they're going to say, you know what, I don't want to work for this company anymore because I don't feel like I was well treated. These are the kind of things that for people I speak to or guide or mentor who are applying for roles, I tell them to look out for these red flags. And that's something that I think is not just tech specific. I think that's just specific to working in a job. It's a two-way street because, I mean, it's a two-way street because you're wanting to hire a candidate as an employer that's hopefully going to be there for quite a while and is going to be good at their job and is going to do the things that you need them to do. And part of that means that you need to be attractive to that particular person that's interviewing. So when you are interviewing, I think sometimes there are situations where you might need the money and you need a role and you might need to take something. And that's okay. There's no shame in that at all. But quite often in tech, we are in a privileged position, especially if you've got a role already and you're looking for something else, or you have been laid off, but you've got your nest egg and you can take your time to find something that you really want to do. Then in that particular instance, you should be looking at, the values of the company. Are you getting on with the interviewers and the people that are representing it? And I think that's not called out as often as it should be because, as an interviewer, you are an ambassador for your company effectively. So I do still see it in tech. I hear loads of horror stories through my 13, 14 years about things that have happened to people in interviews that have made them feel uncomfortable. And it does happen, but also don't be, if the one piece of advice I give to the person listening to this who's interviewing and has seen things like that and isn't sure whether they want to proceed, talk to your recruiter and flag it. It's okay to withdraw if something like that makes you feel uncomfortable. You should be comfortable in your workspace, and that's an indication that maybe this isn't the right one for you.
What's the best way to deal with an issue like a gap in a CV, Katarina?
Sure. I think that the best way to deal with a gap with the best way to address a gap in your CV is to approach it with a sense of maturity. Um, Everybody goes through layoffs. Everybody has periods where they're not necessarily able to work. A lot of people get fired for one reason or another, but um, if a interviewer is asking you about a particular gap in your CV, I would focus on, as positive of a story as possible related to that, with a sense of either maturity, what you learned, and then what you've done in the interim. It's a really good practice if you have a lot of time to keep your skills up, do side projects, volunteer, do something so that your skills don't deteriorate, and maybe you even gain some new ones that would be applicable to a new job. It's especially with tech. I think the attitude in general is that we want to make sure that you, especially if it's a long period, that you've stayed current on the current technology, and you're going to be able to jump in at the same level.
And I mean, sometimes the gaps might be family related, responsibility related. Um, how should women be talking about these sorts of things in the recruitment process? I mean, even though it's illegal in for certain things, for certain questions around sort of families, marital status, etc., but is that something that women, or I guess anybody, yeah, personal reasons.
Personal personal reasons, taking care of families. If it was family, you can say family. You don't have to get much more specific than that, in my opinion.
Is there a time when you might want to talk about that sort of thing, or would your advice be just try to avoid talking about it and just keep things sort of like professional and deal with any of those sorts of adjustments later on down the track?
In the interview process, I would keep it minimal, just because it's not their business, and it shouldn't be affecting your skills and your ability to do the work at the job. And as long as that's true, and you have an ability to manage your work-life balance with the new job, you're bringing your whole skill set, and you don't have to say anything that isn't you don't have to answer illegal questions. Please don't answer illegal questions. That's really what it comes down to. You don't have to answer it.
Yes, I would also flag it with the recruiter if you are asked a question like that. That should not be happening, and they need to be made aware of it. I mean, the only question I've ever asked that might even be remotely related to this was when I was initially applying for the advocacy position. I asked about travel, but I didn't say it's because of family stuff. I just asked what the expectations are on travel, and if there was a minimum travel requirement. And when they said no, that was the end of the discussion. It was fine. So I didn't need to go into the nitty gritty details of why I was asking that. So just keep it factual.
Do blind applications make a difference when there is no name or reference to gender or ethnicity? Katrina?
I think if it's going through an anonymous process, it might help. We've definitely seen the studies where, musicians that audition blind uh, tend to have fairer outcomes. But I would say that it's only going to help with that initial resume review process, because it's going to be pretty obvious once you get into the interview. And if there are any biases being held by the interviewers, that's going to come out pretty quickly. Um, my suggestion, again, for anybody who's having trouble getting their applications to an actual hiring manager and getting interviews is to network. It's to start reaching out to people in the company, even if it's just to ask questions and find out more about the company. And that a lot of times will be a really good pathway to getting your resume in front of an actual human.
So, I mean, we've talked a fair amount about, AI and all of that, but what about the sort of human qualities, and what are the sorts of things that people can emphasize about themselves to really help them sort of like stand out? What will employers really be kind of looking for in the future in terms of, like what a human brings that maybe a machine doesn't? Carly, do you want to start?
I mean, obviously, we could talk about certain aspects of the validation stuff we talked about before. So certainly those kind of validation and testing skills would probably be something that you would need to call out. Understanding of product knowledge, that kind of element of problem solving and diagnostics is probably something else to call out. Probably also human aspects, interviewing for, customers, those kinds of things might also potentially come into the fore as being more kind of human qualities that we might need to that might be more advantageous. And then I guess thinking about more on what I do, ability to kind of share and disseminate knowledge. Like, can you present information? Can you troubleshoot and solve problems and help people answer questions? Those kind of skills might potentially be more useful as well, particularly talking about kind of, the nitty gritty of, AI still being prone to hallucination and things like that. So I wonder if that kind of aspect of sharing those kind of nitty gritty nuanced pieces of knowledge might come into maybe. Katerina, what about you? Anything else you spot?
I feel like really understanding what it is that you want to build is going to be really important, because AI, if it does half of what the hype is claiming, is going to help us build a lot of things very quickly. And so we will have the ability to run in the wrong direction at 10 times the speed. Um, so I think having a really good sense for what it is that actually needs to be built, those product requirements, how to translate them into technical requirements, how to ensure that whatever does get built is maintainable, even if not in the long term for the next couple of years. I think, we're not necessarily going to want to rebuild every piece of our infrastructure every day. Um, but yeah, I think we could end up with a lot of tools that don't work, a lot of platforms that are unstable and broken under the hood, and having that sense of judgment. Also, AI can only really give you stuff that it's seen before. So anything new is absolutely still on the table. Creating things in ways that we haven't before. We're still going to need people to be working on that. So I think it's not completely the end of engineering as a whole.
Do you have any tips on dealing with rejection? We are all going to not get more jobs than we do get. Katrina, do you have any tips on dealing with this?
My advice is not to take a rejection personally. It is entirely possible that there was just somebody else that was a better fit for this role at this time, and you didn't get to meet them. You don't know who they are, so more power to them. And I hope the company well. And if another role opens up and I got that far, then there's a really good chance that they may come back and say, hey, we have another role and you are our second, and that's fantastic. So don't necessarily take it personally, especially in a competitive job market. But at the same time, it's also worth, retrospecting and taking what you learned from each and every interview that you do, and deciding how you're going to adjust going forward, deciding whether or not you did put your best foot forward, and how you might approach a similar question in the future, especially if you can evaluate that yourself. You can, talk to other people, talk to mentors, and go through, hey, I said this, how does that come across, and adjust over time. And I think you can interviewing itself is a skill you can get better at. I have definitely had job hunts where I've gone into the 20 or 30 interviews, and learned a lot as I was going about the job that I was applying for. So, yeah, I think as much as possible, learn from it, iterate it, move on.
Carly, anything to add?
It's a pretty complete answer from Katrina. I think the only thing I would say is don't be scared about asking for feedback if none has been given by the recruiter. I think it's okay to acknowledge in that point, yeah, this sucks, I'm disappointed, that's fine. And I definitely agree, don't take it personally. Just you can take that moment to have a bit of a cry or a bit of a chocolate or tea or glass of wine or whatever it is that kind of is going to get you into a happier space, have a chat with a partner or a friend. Those things to help you get over that knock are definitely things you should do. But also ask for feedback and try and look objectively at it to try and then use that along with what Katerina was saying with your reflections to improve and keep going. I think that's part of the resiliency you need. It can be a really long slog when you're interviewing. So having that resiliency and that ability to reflect and be able to dust yourself off is very important. So all of that is definitely relevant.
And you've both mentioned, but Carly especially has mentioned networking, the thing that I think a lot of us love to hate. I know I do. Any tips on sort of best practice for networking, either I get maybe within a network that you already have or with people that you want to incorporate into your network who perhaps you don't know personally?
Yeah, I can start because my strategy for networking is slightly different. I'm not the person that loves going to, drinks and circling round and chatting to people. And when I started early in my career, I tended to get sucked into really interesting conversations with people. And then I'd break the cardinal rules of not moving between the group and all those kinds of things. Um, my advice for networking is try and go to either meetups or conferences or events like that are focused on learning, because that can come across in a way where you don't feel like you have to work the room so much, and you actually can use it as an opportunity to meet people in maybe a more authentic way in a environment that's a bit more informal. And it might come across more authentic because you can potentially go up to the speaker afterwards and ask them questions, or you can get chatting to the person that's sitting next to you in the seat at the meetup, and that can make it a bit less scary. And for me, that's how I've built up and my network, but also it's how I built my network up outside of the company that I worked in at the time. And I worked for the big bank because I found that for those periods of time, my network got really stuck on either people in financial services or people that worked in the same company. So that was a way to go and meet people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different companies and technologies and domains, and learn some really cool stuff as well. So I definitely look out for those areas, those networks, and you can use tools like Luma and meetup.com to find those. Also, virtual opportunities are certainly valid as well. Don't dismiss those. So, following or connecting people with LinkedIn, asking them if they want to grab a Zoom coffee or something like that, which can make it feel a bit less scary, is another good thing. And also look out for options in your company as well. So one of the things we have at Elastic integrated in Slack, which probably many companies do as well, has a tool called Donut, and that actually pairs you up with random people every month that you can have a coffee with. And I found that really helpful when I moved into Elastic, because it got me meeting new people in a new company as I was figuring out and finding the ropes. So generally look for those tools, look for these events, and that will help you expand your network.
Katerina, is there anything that you would add, or anything that you found to be particularly helpful?
I would say, for me, especially my early attempts at networking, I didn't particularly like the idea of networking because it felt like a lot to go up to a total stranger and start demanding help from them. Like, do you have any jobs at your company? I would much prefer to approach networking as making friends in the industry. So find places where people have something in common with you and go out and talk to them and tell them about what you're up to and ask them about what they're up to and trade information, ask, questions, learn from their stories, and basically be open that you are open to roles, that let everybody in your life know that you're open to roles. You have no idea who in your extended family might know somebody who knows somebody who has a job. So, kind of like being open to those opportunities, to having some coffee and finding out whether or not, what this person is working on is something that interests you, or maybe they have a friend who actually has a role open that they can refer you to. Um, that's really where I think networking becomes a lot more powerful, when you don't go into those initial conversations with expectations, but with the attitude that you want to learn and you want to make friends.
And finally, what advice would you give to women who may be lacking the confidence to apply for a job intake? Katrina, let's start with you.
I feel like confidence oftentimes comes from preparedness. And if you feel like you are missing something, then it can be very, especially in technology, it can be very difficult to get to the point where you feel confident about your skills. So make sure that you are up on your skills is the number one. And if you are up on your skills and you still find yourself being like, oh, I don't know, at that point, ignore every instinct you have around your confidence and just go for it, because the confidence will come. It's I think confidence is something that everybody experiences, but when women express it, they're going to get damaged more than when men express lack of confidence. So that one's one where I think, as a whole, we just kind of have to power through it and find ways to present yourself as more confident than you might be. And it does take courage. It's hard. Um,
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's easier sometimes, and I've had this as well, where if you can look at like your wins and what you've overcome in the past, or look at things that are transferable skills that might be something you can showcase to highlight that you can do something, and think about it more of, I did this, so that therefore means I can do that. That sometimes can give you a bit more of a nudge to apply. So I have a win book where I actually keep track of these things, and if I'm having a rough moment, I those are kind of helpful to look back at, and help you kind of go, you know what, I can do this, that's fine. I think the other things when I've been lacking in confidence to apply for jobs is, if you've got a friend or a mentor or an ally, like, have that coffee conversation and say to them, what do you think about this? Do you think this would work for me? That's how I've ended up kind of going down avenues that have worked out really well for me in applying for jobs. Like, in fact, that's how I ended up with the advocacy gig, as we talked about earlier on. So I definitely would encourage people to think about it that way. And also, you know, just keep at it. Yes, applying for jobs is grueling. Keep asking for feedback, doing all the things that we've mentioned in the other tips, and it will come and it will get there in the end. So just keep trying would be the other thing I'd say.
A win book and fake it till you make it and keep on going. All excellent pieces of advice. Thank you both so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. And, I know that I've learned a lot, and I think our listeners will have learned a lot too. So thank you. Right. So we're coming to the end of the episode. A huge thank you to Carly and Katerina for sharing their insights and expertise with us. Such a fascinating discussion. What will you take away, Ellie, from, everything that we heard today?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about what to expect when I'm applying for jobs, as well as how to deal with a gap in my CV, or how to talk to recruiters when they reach out, or what to expect when the AI is going to expand in future. So and so on. So thank you so much for thank you so much to Carly and Katri.
Yeah, and if you have found any of what they've said particularly interesting, intriguing, not maybe not your experience, then do feel free to share your thoughts with us. We're on social media. Next time we'll be looking at building resilience and confidence after failure in tech. So send us any questions that you have, and we will try to get those to our experts or deal with them. And as ever, thank you so much for being with us. Keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next time.
A special thanks to Carly and Katrina again for joining us on today's episode and sharing their valuable insights. And to everyone who is listening, take care, and thank you for being here and being part of Unlock Your Tech. Bye.
That's it.